If you've already played Mario Wonder, or even seen it for that matter, it probably goes without saying that it's a very good game, one that does a lot to break out of the mold that the previous entries had created. While there are certainly many aspects of the game that contribute towards this, the introduction of the Wonder Flower holds no small part. I'm sure you've heard its praises sung by many others, and you'll hear it from me too. The Wonder Flower is an amazing mechanic, allowing the developers to finally break free of Mario's two-dimensional design, and letting him do, frankly, whatever they want. Whether that be by allowing him to jump around on living objects, run from herds of stampeding bulls, jump on giant bouncing hippos, become long.
I don't remember my Luigi being that stretchy.
And all of this happens in just the first world. Later on, you'll turn into a spiky ball, stick to the ceiling as goop, walk in the background, and even go into space, with hippos. That's just a few examples, but there's so many good ones that it's impossible to do them all justice, and I still haven't even talked about the best one yet.
They're singing.
My jaw was on the floor during this entire section. It's so wonderfully strange, and it came as a huge surprise for someone who had honestly thought they had seen everything when it comes to 2D Mario. It definitely sets the stage for the rest of the game. I love it.
Wonderful!
Wonder Flowers also help remove any sense of repetitiveness in levels that might otherwise look familiar. Not that they needed much help with that anyways, because they're all super unique, even without the Wonder Flowers. These levels tend to follow the same approach that 3D World takes, where it introduces a new concept for almost every level, constantly ushering you from one cool idea to the next without wasting any time. And if the same concept is reused, it's either a variation of that concept or an expansion on it, not a repeat. There's this really great level with these new Mama enemies, which run around eating Goombas and potentially you if you aren't careful. They're pretty easy to avoid as Mario, but halfway through the level you get turned into a Goomba by a Wonder Flower, suddenly turning the game into a stealth horror experience. I particularly like this little gotcha moment where one of the Mamas suddenly runs towards one of the bushes you're hiding in, only for it to eat the coins in front of the bush instead. And afterwards, the game just moves on to the next thing. But more than just taking inspiration from 3D World, Wonder seems to take inspiration from several other Mario games as well. I'd say Mario Maker is definitely one of them, as a lot of the levels in Mario Wonder seem to carry its same DNA. This break time level in particular really stands out to me, and it could almost certainly be recreated in Mario Maker. But there's also levels with floating speed strips, time blocks, conditions that need to be met, and puzzles, all things that feel very reminiscent of Mario Maker's style. I don't know if there are any more examples that I can point out specifically, but I could just feel its aura as I went through the game. If you've played through the game, then you know what I mean, and I think a lot of other people have taken notice of it as well. I also think it's apparent that Mario Wonder takes a lot from Mario World as well. The layout of the Flower Kingdom is very similar to that of Dinosaur Islands, with both being interconnected rings that have a giant Bowser in their center. Mario also seems to have the same running animation as well. Since we're here, I'd like to comment on how much I like these animations. The way Mario springs out of a duck jump while in midair is a great little detail, and he'll even teeter on the edge of ledges. The way he can waddle around or throw fireballs while crouched is also pretty silly. But back to the main point, I want to focus more on the interconnectivity of these two maps, rather than the general layout. Specifically, I feel that Mario Wonder is considerably less committed to the idea than Mario World. That game is full of secret exits and hidden pathways, many of which will lead you down a completely different route through the area. Some even allow you to skip entire zones. There's one in Vanilla Dome which allows you to go over the top of the mountain rather than through it, skipping the world boss and taking you straight to the next one instead. And when you take Star Road into consideration, it becomes even more absurd. If you know what you're doing, you can reach Bowser's castle in around 20 minutes. But Mario Wonder is only interconnected because you can walk between the different areas. There are secret paths that lead to the bonus world, but none that actually connect to other areas, which I feel like is kind of a missed opportunity considering that the game actually lets you do the last 3 areas in whatever order you want. At that point, you might as well put a few hidden paths between them. In fact, Mario Wonder is the only game in the series that doesn't let you skip worlds. You have to do all of them to complete the game. While I definitely like the options that the other games give, it's probably more warranted in Mario Wonder's case, considering that Nintendo is leaning more towards quality over quantity this time, so it makes sense that they want you to see most of the game. Not that they couldn't also just put paths between areas and still force you to complete all of them. Anyways, the point I just made wasn't really meant to be a criticism, but was more of an observation. I think I just like Mario World's approach to its map better than Mario Wonder's. Not that the way Mario Wonder does it is bad either. That isn't to say that I don't have any criticisms to give Mario Wonder, however, nor do I think it's a perfect game. Although I gave my fair share of praise towards the Wonder Flowers earlier, unfortunately not all of them are winners. Like this one that just rains stars down, and that's it. Alright. And then they do it twice too for some reason. Another one that really stands out to me is when the game turns you invincible and lets you swim in lava. I feel like this could have been an interesting idea, but they don't really do anything with it. And since you're invincible, you can't even fail. There's not even a timer. It's really pretty boring. A different level actually does the invincibility thing a lot better, and it involves you turning into Metal Mario and having to intentionally electrocute yourself to see through the dark. It even plays the Metal Cap theme from Mario 64, which is a nice little touch. Besides that, there's also a couple levels where the Wonder Flower effect is just speeding up or slowing down the game. Which, like, okay, I guess? I mean, it'd probably be fine if they did this one time, but it shows up several times throughout the game. A lot of these less interesting Wonder Flower effects just kind of feel like placeholders in levels where they couldn't really come up with new ideas. At least that might explain why you see effects like the stars falling and the speed changing multiple times. The ones where you have to collect these flower tokens show up a lot too, though I don't mind seeing those so much because the scenarios involved in collecting them are usually pretty different. However, there are a couple of levels involving these things that I really don't like. Remember how I thought that some levels in Mario Wonder take a lot of inspiration from Mario Maker? Well, perhaps some take a little too much inspiration, bringing back those really fun troll levels where you have to stand and jump in every single tile to try and find an invisible block. These are really obnoxious, and I can't emphasize enough just how frustrating it can be to jump around for minutes on end just trying to find one of them. They aren't telegraphed at all, which is made even more annoying by the fact that there's a bonus level that actually does do that. But it's more than just the invisible blocks. These levels also have a lot of really poorly executed puzzles. Let's take this one for example. First, you have to find the right pipe to go down. Nope, not that one. Wrong again. Alright, there we go. Did you know that you were just given every piece of information that you needed to complete the puzzle? No? Well, let's look at it again. What's that? You still can't see it? Okay, we'll do it one more time.
He moves right there.
Oh, obviously. I mean, how could you possibly miss that? But seriously, how could you not miss that? The window for viewing the pipe is so brief and small that I'm pretty sure people only found it by just ramming their face into the wall on a whim. In fact, I couldn't even see the pipe at all until analyzing it frame by frame. There's only one of these types of levels in the entire game that I genuinely think works, and it's because the puzzles in it are actually logical. You roll a ball up a hill to smash through some bricks, kill these cheeps through the wall with some bubbles, jump into the ceiling to reach a hidden ledge. This one in particular is really sneaky, but the game actually gives you a pretty fair hint, although subtle. These are the kind of puzzles that all of these levels should have, rather than just mindlessly searching for a hidden block or playing pipe roulette. However, I'm not completely oblivious when it comes to these levels, and I do realize that these levels can be a lot more enjoyable depending on the way you play. Just so long as you pay for the online first. I'm only partially joking, of course, but these levels do become considerably easier the moment you start playing online. Loads of other people have placed down handy markers to show you where everything is hidden, making the search for hidden blocks and secret pipes a whole lot easier. The way you're supposed to play these levels is even in the name, Search Party. The game wants you to bring along other people to make finding these secrets easier. That's great and all, but it's still pretty inconsiderate towards the people who don't want to fork over the extra $20 for the relatively subpar online service. And really, I can't blame them. It's like paying $80 instead of $60 just to get the full experience. While I do have the Switch's online service, I personally never utilized the multiplayer in Mario Wonder because I wanted to be able to get an accurate assessment of the game's difficulty. That's also the same reason why I avoided using badges outside of their respective levels. I didn't want to be given an unfair advantage, and I'm happy to report that you don't need them at all in order to fully complete the normal levels. While they can certainly help, you are never forced to use them to get the extra Wonder Seeds or the purple coins. Here, you could use the underwater dash to get into this pipe, but the game also lets you use a turtle shell to accomplish the same thing. I'm really glad that they did this, as it circumvents the problem of potentially having to redo a level because you don't have the right badge equipped, which I certainly would have found very annoying. Despite not using them very much, I still think that these badges probably work better in their own levels anyway. They're really just gimmicks, so having a short couple of stages centered entirely around them feels like the best way to fully utilize their unique concepts. A couple of them are pretty great too, especially the wall climb jump and the grappling vine, as they add a lot more to Mario's mobility. There's also a badge that lets you do the crouch jump from Mario 2, and even one that turns you invisible, an idea that seems to be stolen directly from the first game I ever made, so I better get compensated for that, Nintendo. But still, these badges would almost certainly make the game easier, so I definitely feel justified for not using them. The difficulty itself is actually pretty good, and while I didn't find it to be overly challenging, it's definitely got a few tricky parts here and there. Especially the last two bonus levels, which are just straight up hard. While I definitely appreciate more of a challenge, I'm still glad that the game wasn't a complete pushover either, as the new Super Mario Bros. Series definitely tended to struggle with that a bit. I'm honestly kind of shocked that I never reached 99 lives on either of my playthroughs, something that I certainly can't say about New Super Mario Bros. Wii. In that game, I can get the maximum lives by around the 4th world, which might sound impressive, but it's really not. The game is so liberal with its 1-ups, a surprisingly common problem among Nintendo platformers. I really don't like that Mario loses his hat at 99 lives either, it just looks wrong. And what's worse is that he still tries to take it off after completing a level. Ugh! However, there is one kind of glaring flaw with the difficulty of Mario Wonder, and it's regarding the purple coins. Now, I'm not talking about the locations of these coins. A lot of them are hidden pretty well, and they actually add a lot of extra value to the levels. No, what I'm really talking about is the act of collecting them. In the new Super Mario Bros. Series, or even Yoshi's Island for that matter, if you collect a star coin, then you don't get to keep it until you either reach a checkpoint or beat the level. But in Mario Wonder, you still get to keep the purple coin even if you die. They did this exact same thing when they re-released 3D World for the Switch, and I just can't get over how stupid it is. It might sound fine and dandy on paper, but it creates some pretty obvious problems for coins that you have to actively put yourself in danger to collect. The problem being that it is just way too easy to kill yourself to get the coin, rather than doing it the intended way. Why bother trying to be good at the game to get a coin, when you can just throw yourself to your death and still get it anyways? I know I've done it before. It's way too tempting of a solution, especially for coins that only give you a limited amount of time to collect them. I mean, at that point, why not? Obviously, it's not that huge of a deal, and it doesn't really affect my opinion of the game very much overall, but I still think it's something that Nintendo should avoid doing again in the future. It just feels sloppy, and it ends up making some of the purple coins a bit less engaging. Speaking of sloppy... I'm honestly kind of surprised that I made it this far into the video without addressing the elephant in the room. Haha. I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that seeing Mario turn into an elephant was a bit of a shock at first, but I've definitely come around to it after playing through the game. And honestly, it's not all that outlandish of an idea considering that this is kind of a common thing among Mario games. In the past, he's been a tanuki, a frog, a bee, a penguin, a cat, and now an elephant. Though this power-up definitely takes it further than just a suit this time. I was a little worried that his larger size would make him more cumbersome, but I'm pretty sure that he still moves at the same speed as normal Mario, and although he has a larger hitbox, it is more than made up for by the swiping attack that he can do with his trunk. It's actually pretty useful, not only for breaking blocks, but also for attacking and defeating enemies. There's a couple arena levels, and a lot of time I'd find myself picking the elephant power-up just because of that. Additionally, Elephant Mario can even store water in his trunk, which is useful for uncovering secrets. It's a pretty complete package all around, though I am a little tempted to criticize the fact that it is only one out of just 3 new power-ups, as it kind of feels underwhelming considering how many other new things Mario Wonder does. However, this lack of new power-ups is almost certainly the result of the badges. I could easily see badges like the grappling vine and boosting spin jump being potential new power-ups, and some of them even take the same functions as the power-ups in previous games. I kinda wish they just were power-ups, but if it was for the sake of trying something new, then I can understand why they aren't. Though, I would definitely feel less bad about using a temporary power-up in another level rather than a permanent badge. One thing that I've neglected to talk about so far are the worlds, or more specifically, their thematics. At this point, I think I'm ready to accept that Nintendo will probably never move away from some of these themes, most of which have been done so many times now that I think they're just part of Mario's identity. There always has to be a grass world, a desert world, and a lava world. Even 3D Mario, which often does a much better job at finding new places for him to go, still seems to struggle to get away from these themes as well. But despite that, I still think Mario Wonder does a good job of shaking things up, and although a lot of the same worlds return, they now have multiple identities. For example, while there might be another jungle world, it also doubles as an underground mine, and the lava world is now a series of vertical caves that is actually inside of a volcano. Even the first world has some great dynamics, with an open plain, underground area, and mountain. But the most obviously impressive world is the Shining Falls, which has a theme that is completely unique to the series. At first I thought it might just be another water world, and while there is still kind of one in the game, the Shimmering Falls certainly isn't, and the levels definitely reflect that. Another thing I really like about this world are the backgrounds of the levels themselves. A lot of them have this really abstract geometry, and it's just straight up cool to look at. Really, a lot of the backgrounds in this game are pretty great, like the snowy wonderlands in the background of the early Fluff Puff Peak levels, the expansive caverns of Fungi Mines, or the giant machinery of Bowser's Castle. I particularly like the use of purple in some of the desert levels, as it's an evocative color that provides a more mysterious context to the desert, and one that's a lot more interesting to look at than just constant yellow. But my all-time favorite background has to be the one in Muncher Fields. Seeing Bowser's Castle looming in the distance is such a striking visual, and I love watching it slowly pan across the screen as you make your way through the level. This level's kinda just a slam dunk all around, not only visually and mechanically, but also musically as well. I just can't get enough of this song. It's got such a mystique and feel to it, and the somewhat unorthodox percussion is literal ear candy. In general, I find myself much more attracted to ambient tracks like this, especially in Mario games where the music is often mostly upbeat. Kinda reminds me of Donkey Kong Country, which is always a good thing. But the great tracks don't just stop there, and while I didn't notice it as much on my first playthrough, after playing through the game a second time, I can honestly really appreciate a lot of its music. The snow levels feel super upbeat and energetic. The desert is sufficiently Egyptian. The trials match the ambiguity of the world they're located in. And of course, the airship theme from Mario Maker returns as well. Speaking of the airship levels, I think they're generally pretty good, except for one teensy little problem. The bosses suck, if you can even call them that, because they are so simple that they provide virtually zero challenge at all. All you have to do to beat them is to dodge a couple obstacles and then step on a button. That's it. And then you do it again 2 more times. It's so pathetic that I'm actually not sure if it's even meant to be a boss at all. But even as a challenge, it's still not very good. Maybe the first one could stay the same, but everyone after should be exponentially more difficult, and the easiest way to do that would be to just make the conveyor belt longer. Seriously, why didn't they just do that? The levels seem to get harder, but these sections stay the same every time. Unfortunately, this lack of interesting boss fights applies to a lot of the rest of the game as well. Let's take a look at them. There's Bowser Jr., and Bowser Jr., then Bowser Jr., and finally, Bowser Jr. Oh wait a minute, it's all Bowser Jr. I'm fine with him being a reoccurring boss, but to have him make up the bulk of all the bosses in the game was seriously disappointing. Some of the fights are okay, but others feel like they've already been done before, like this one at the end of Fluff Puff Peaks. I don't even think I have to say what I'm thinking here. If you've played Mario Wii before, then you already know what I mean. But it's not so much the mechanics I don't like, but more that you have to fight him specifically again and again and again. It's really repetitive, especially when there are already so few bosses in the first place. I think it's Mario Wonder's biggest problem by far. Thankfully, the final boss against Bowser fares a lot better, and although I would have liked to fight him as a giant castle, what they did instead was still cool too. Having to time your jumps to the rhythm of the music to hit his weak point is a pretty fun mechanic, and it's one that is expanded upon as the fight goes on. I think Bowser's design is pretty neat too, though the hand gimmick has admittedly been done a few too many times at this point. Still, it's 100% better than just Bowser but big, and I'd especially like to highlight that this is the first unique 2D Bowser fight since 2009. You aren't even saving the princess this time around either, but are instead just stopping Bowser from taking over the world or something, I don't know. It doesn't really matter much anyways, because the story still isn't all that spectacular. Not that I ever expected it would be. Mainline Mario games, especially the 2D ones, have never had much of a focus on the plot, with a few exceptions. Some of the 3D games are able to capture a certain mood or feel, but for the most part, the story only serves as a way for Mario to jump around silly levels. Mario Wonder's the same way as well, but in spite of that, I still think the game has some pretty good writing, and it's in the form of the talking flowers. Seriously, I'm honestly just about as surprised saying that as you probably are hearing it. When I first saw the trailers for Mario Wonder, I really thought that these flowers would be the worst part of the game, and I was almost convinced that they would constantly spout obvious advice and bad jokes. But amazingly, they don't do that. And some of them are actually even funny.
I'm falling! Heave ho! Heave ho! Way to pull! But if you mess with things like that, you never know what will happen. Ta-da! Ta-da! The sequel! Where did you come from? I'm so happy you're here. It's scary being alone. Stay with me. Don't leave me! Did you hear someone just now? Must have been my imagination.
Seriously, hats off to Nintendo for pulling this off. I went into the game totally prejudiced against these flowers, but came out actually liking them. Honestly, I can't even imagine the game without them. They totally fit the mood. But if you are one of those poor souls who don't like the talking flowers, then you can just go into the menu and turn them off. Again, I'm amazed that you are even given the option to do this. Nintendo has consistently had a my way or the highway policy with the options in their games, and for the longest time you couldn't even change the controls. So them giving you the option to turn off the talking flowers is a surprisingly considerate move, and I hope it's something that they keep doing more of in the future. Really, outside of the few criticisms I had, I hope they keep doing more of everything that Mario Wonder has to offer. It's a great step forward for the series, one that thoroughly challenges any preconceptions of 2D Mario, as well as providing a unique and engaging experience. It certainly has its flaws here and there, and you probably know by now how much I like to harp on about them, but the pros far, far outweigh the cons. There's a ton to enjoy in this game, whether that be the fun level design, great music, or the art direction, and I would definitely say that it's a worthwhile experience. I'm sure I'll be playing it again in the future. And that's it. If you just wanted to hear about Mario Wonder, then you can go now. That part of the video is pretty much over. Everything else that I have to say after this point is entirely subjective, and it is solely based on my own personal interests. If you aren't interested in hearing that, then you can probably leave. Alright? Bye! So, what more is there for me to say? I've already told you that Mario Wonder's a good game, and that it's worth playing. Well, that's really only half true. I still think that Mario Wonder's a good game, but I wouldn't say that it's an amazing one. You might be surprised to hear me say that after I complimented it so much, but I couldn't really criticize the game for something that is only really apparent to me. Have you ever played a game or watched a movie that you thought had no obvious issues, but despite that, it still isn't your favorite? It doesn't necessarily have any problems, but it's still lacking something extra that would make it really stand out to you. That's the problem I have with Mario Wonder. It's a good 2D platformer, but one that I think has been massively upstaged by several others. That isn't to say that every game I play has to be some timeless masterpiece, and really the point of this part of the video is to highlight what I specifically like when it comes to video games. I'm not criticizing Mario Wonder for not having the things that I'm about to talk about, but I'm instead pointing out why I like them better. I also just really wanted to take the opportunity to talk about some of my favorite games. So what things do I think make a 2D platformer special? Well, I actually kinda hinted at them throughout the video, and I'll start with the one that I brought up first. Difficulty. I really like difficult games. Obviously, that's not everyone's cup of tea, but to me, they provide a level of challenge that easier games simply don't have. I can still totally enjoy and even love easier games, but a lot of times they just don't end up as engaging to me. The obstacles often don't require as much effort to overcome, and the victories aren't as triumphant. It's part of the reason why I enjoy games like Dark Souls, Punch-Out!, and Enter the Gungeon so much. But there is one 2D platformer in particular that stands out to me for its grueling difficulty. Donkey Kong Country 2 is a pretty hard game, and despite how innocent it might look on the surface, it is almost unforgiving in its difficulty. The game is full of precise jumps, perfectly timed maneuvers, and tough bosses, and I'm confident that just about every first playthrough of the game has gone something like this. When you finally beat this game, you are a changed person. You've seen some shit. That might sound unpleasant, but despite how merciless the game may seem, I don't think it ever becomes unfair. Well, there is one part at the end of the game, during the final boss. King K. Rool's final phase has him turn invisible and spawn in random locations around the arena, and if you're too close to him, you'll get sucked in and killed. I really don't like this part of the game, as it's super frustrating to make it through the entire boss fight, only to die to something really cheap at the end. I'm sure there's a right way to do it, but I just don't know how. It's kind of the same problem I have with Cuphead, where despite having beaten the game several times, there are still a couple of bosses that I consistently struggle with, and I think that's a sign of unfair design. If you've beaten something once before, then it should only ever get easier. Otherwise, it shows that you didn't win because of your skills, but because you got lucky. I also think that it highlights the distinction between the words challenging and hard. The word challenging implies some level of fairness, but the word hard doesn't. I don't think a game should be hard just to be hard, because I feel at that point, you are blatantly disrespecting the player. You're being made to suffer, not to have fun. And yes, you can have fun losing to something. But when a boss is doing 5 different things at once, or the level has no checkpoints, it's just meant to screw you over. Despite its initial difficulty, Donkey Kong Country 2 does get easier, and your continued improvement as a player is part of what makes it so much fun. You want that drive to get better, that ability to succeed where you might have previously failed. Being able to skim right through a section you might have previously struggled with is extremely satisfying, and where the game might have kicked your ass once, you can finally kick its ass back. But even as you improve, that tension never leaves. You always have to stay on your toes, and it's what keeps the game engaging. That same challenge is always there, even if you've played the game 10 or even 20 times, and that's why I'll always come back to it. But more than the difficulty, Donkey Kong Country 2 is just a genuinely great game. In a lot of ways, I think it's even better than the first Donkey Kong Country, at least in terms of pure gameplay, as the levels are a lot more tightly designed, and the decision to replace Donkey Kong with Dixie Kong makes it generally less sluggish. However, I don't think I would say that I prefer Donkey Kong Country 2 over its predecessor, and that's because it fails to capture a certain aspect of that game that I feel is severely missed. Atmosphere. Donkey Kong Country absolutely nails its atmosphere, which seems kind of bizarre considering that it's a game about monkeys trying to get their bananas back. However, its musical choices capture a certain mood that I haven't seen done in many other games since, especially for 2D platformers. And just the first level, Donkey Kong Country sets this up brilliantly, and I think that the track DK Island Swing perfectly encapsulates the tone of the rest of the game. There's a very likely chance that you've heard it before, as its main melody is almost synonymous with the character. It's upbeat and catchy, and it fits the initial impression you might have of the game. But about halfway through the song, its tone suddenly shifts, and its focus becomes one of atmosphere. Rather than just jumping around a jungle collecting bananas, you are now lost in that jungle. You notice the trees stretching endlessly into the background, the sounds of crickets and local fauna inhabiting the world around you. The heat of the sun fades into the night, and an approaching storm calls the fall of rain. It obscures your view, making it difficult to see, and the flash of lightning is the only thing that illuminates the dark forest around you. To quote Video Game Donkey, this is how you establish atmosphere in a video game, and Donkey Kong Country continues to do this exceptionally well. The music for the cave levels, ironically titled Cave Dweller Concert, is one of pure ambience, and it fully commits the idea of being in an actual cave. Most of the song is just the sound of water dripping from the ceiling, with only a few sporadic notes echoing off the cavern walls. Sometimes, traces of a melody will pass through the air, before quickly fading away. But finally, after waiting through minutes of droning cavern ambience, the true song finally reveals itself. And then it's gone. The music for the temples make them feel ancient and hostile. But reminiscent of a time long gone. Northern Hemispheres inspires panic in the already frenzied levels, and dread towards the storm to come. Misty Menace is somehow even more ambient than Cave Dweller Concert, only filled by the sound of clanging steel and a quiet melodic hum. And of course, who can forget aquatic ambience? I think of video games as a form of art, and I love to see them fully embrace what makes them so special. Things like atmosphere and immersion that can only be accomplished by giving someone control of someone else, even if it is Donkey Kong or Diddy Kong. But not Kiddy Kong. Fuck him. However, there is something that neither of these games have, and that's a good story. They don't need one, their primary focus is on platforming anyways, but what if you could do both? Celeste does a lot of things right, from its super fluid controls, great music, and amazing level design. But one of the things that has always stood out the most to me is its story, or more specifically, how it weaves its narrative directly into the gameplay. The main character, Madeline, is currently going through one of the hardest times in her life, and her trying to get through it is perfectly represented through the physical act of climbing a mountain. It's hard and exhausting. A lot of times you'll have to fail before you can finally succeed. You'll make some progress, but then one bad thing will bring you tumbling all the way back down to square one. But by confronting yourself, you can finally understand and accept who you are. It's the only way to make a change, and it's the only path to becoming a better person. And when you finally reach the top, the view is more beautiful than ever before. I love this analogy for depression, as a mountain that you need to overcome. But truthfully, the mountain in Celeste is a metaphor for all of our problems. Some are bigger than others, but they still need to be overcome. And it's a message that I think is universally applicable to everyone. I might be getting a bit off topic here, so let's bring it back to what this video was originally about. Mario. Yes, even though it's just Mario, I still think his games can have engaging difficulties, great atmospheres, and even amazing stories. But I understand why Mario Wonder doesn't. Nintendo is a massive company, and while they certainly have their share of talented individuals, their main goal, first and foremost, is to generate money. The bottom line is that games focused more towards niche audiences just don't sell as well. And Mario is designed to be generally appealing to all audiences, which honestly has a bit of its own merit too. It means that you can play them with people who might not otherwise play video games. But I think that niche games have their place too, as oftentimes they appeal to a more specific desire that something made to be more generally appealing simply just can't. There's a quote from Ricky Gervais that goes something along the lines of, "The best things are often an acquired taste," and it's always stood out to me because I think it's totally true. The end of Evangelion is my favorite movie of all time, and it is absolutely not for everyone. But I think everyone's like that. We all have our own different things that we enjoy, whether that be the kind of movies we watch, the kind of music we enjoy, or the kind of video games that we play. It's what makes us unique, and there's nothing wrong with that. It sure beats out being just another slight variation of the same thing. While it doesn't have everything that I'd like to see, Mario Wonder is certainly not the same as its predecessors. Where they faltered, Mario Wonder far surpasses them, in just about every way, and it honestly makes me excited for what the future of 2D Mario holds. As for that future, I can't say for certain what's in store. All I do know is that it's looking a hell of a lot brighter than it was 10 years ago.